Nick Ayton, thank you very much for joining me today on my podcast. Let's get started, really. I know you have a very interesting profile. That's why I reached out to you. You're a thought leader, speaker, writer, futurist, blockchain business architect, and more. The list goes on. So I would love to find out who you are as a person. You're really good to hear your story. Maybe you can share some nuggets of wisdom and some interesting stories from your whole life in general. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I'll try. I'll certainly try and live up to that billing. Thank you. So,
Great. If you could maybe tell us who you are and what you're up to these days and go from there, really.
well, it's quite an interesting sort of opening sort of question, because the I guess the assumption is that at my time in life, that I sort of know what I'm doing and where I'm going, and the reality is I'm still not sure, to be honest. Where others you might have spoken to are a bit more certain, I'm less certain, and I think the reason for that is I have a attention deficit problem. I like chasing new things, and maybe it's the thrill of the chase rather than the destination that sort of, I guess, has been part of my life for the last sort of 45 years in business, really. So I can't really give you a clear sort of direction on that one, but I think throughout my whole life, I'm still just trying to discover what I want to do and what I want to be, and it's hard, right? Because life is, lots of people in your ear telling you what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and you have different sections of your life when you're young and you think you're invincible, and then in your 30s you suddenly got bills to pay, and your 40s, your children, and there's other responsibilities. Then your 50s you start thinking about runway, and then when you hit your 60s you really think about runway. How much time have I got left? What are the things on my bucket list I'd like to still achieve? And that's really how I sort of assess things, really. I hadn't set out to do any of what I've done. Most of it has been walking through doors that have just opened. Some of them have been the wrong doors, of course, and in a sense, I guess I'm quite opportunistic. I'm quite an energy and emotional person, so I'm drawn to the things that make me feel good, which is a short term sort of fulfillment, and then later on you suddenly think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I shouldn't have walked through that door. But I guess it depends what your starting point is, and I know we'll talk about parents and growing up and things at some point, but yeah, I'm still not sure, to be honest, Matt, where I'm heading. I've started lots of new things. I'm always starting new projects, and I have the privilege of working with my children, which is always good.
Wonderful. Got it. Thank you for sharing. I mean, in a way, I can relate. And maybe some people would say similar things. I like to chase things and start new things. Maybe not all of them I've got accomplished to the fullest, but I
Yeah,
like the thrill of being able to explore opportunities. In a way, I get the excitement of trying something new out and see where it leads me. It's not necessarily chasing for, the monetary aspects of success or the visibility. It's more of, let's see how I'm capable of tackling something new and then learn something from it, acquire some skill sets. But when you look at the younger generation, I mean, we are pushed through a system. So we have to go to school, we have to get good grades. We are being programmed, pre programmed to be prepared for the world. But in a way, when we exit the schooling system, we not necessarily are prepared for the real life scenarios, how to deal with challenges, how to do our finances, maybe perhaps saving, investing. We are pretty much built or coded to become rats that work in a kind of a factory that have to generate money for other businesses. It does shift a lot now with the new generations, but I think it's very hard. So, what's your take on this? Do you think younger people should be chasing their dreams and passion, or should they really be going through the schooling system and do the traditional way? And how soon should they take maybe the risks to follow the dream or professional career in life?
Oh, look, Matt, there's a lot in there, right? So let's unpack a bit of that because I think you and I, probably share a lot of the same thoughts here. Um, I think really you got to think about how the world is structured and how it runs and how it operates. And maybe we don't want to get into that too much, but everything is designed for a purpose, and the main purpose. I mean, my family history is Scottish, so they go back to the 12th century. So if you think about the land grab of families and tribes that happened maybe 1,000 years ago, that's really the center of all where the wealth came from, because they took it and they were in a position to take it. So roll forward a few hundred years, and that wealth and that power still remains. And if you think about the what used to be called in the UK the landed gentry, there was 3 or 4 moments in time where a lot of that changed. For example, 1349, I think, the Black Death in Europe wiped out 75% of the people. But what that meant is that labor suddenly became valuable. So serfdom, it was the end of serfdom, where to survive you had to work for the lord or the master. And so 1349, that changed, and people then could trade their value or trade their time and get paid better rewards, because labor was scarce. So if you think about the starting point, we're all on the treadmill, we're all slaves, because the system is designed that way to keep certain people in a position where they can keep calling the shots for us. Now, the next big thing happened in Europe, really, was in 1650, which was the Glorious Revolution, wherein in the UK in particular, monarchy had an iron grip, like they did in royal families all over Europe, Russia and Sweden and Holland and France, and they all had their monarchies. But what happened in the UK, of course, is that the Glorious Revolution diluted the power of the monarchy and handed it to Parliament. And that laid the conditions for the Industrial Revolution to happen, without which, of course, it's arguably we wouldn't have continued along the path of progress that we have. Although I do think our progress has been very poor. And I think our progress has been held back on purpose. So we can talk about that another time. But I agree with you. I think all of the systems, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's food, whether it's financial, money, are designed to control the people. And the school system is one of my great heroes was Sir Ken Robinson, and he wrote a great book called Epiphany, and it's how to find your purpose and how to find what you're good at. And he basically sums it up like this: when we're born, children are super creative, but the system over time destroys that creativity and makes us into, to your point, makes us into the automatons, the robots, to follow orders, to do as we're told. And we're rammed through an education system that doesn't find out what you're good at. It doesn't care. And it squeezes you through a system because the purpose of the system is to get you into do certain jobs and certain employment, and to keep you on that treadmill, to keep you dependent. So I think we sort of share similar views there. And this current generation, we can argue, are pushing back on that, but I don't think they are. I just don't think. I think their head is in the blue screen, and they've got different issues. I mean, I've just written a TV miniseries actually, and part of that looks at the Gen X, which is, I'm a baby boomer, right? So we look at the Gen X, which comes after the baby boomers. And then we have obviously the millennials and the Gen Zs. Well, actually, if you break each one of those down, they've all got different issues for different reasons, because they've grown up in slightly different environment. So I think the current generation, I mean, I can talk about this because my children are 26 to 38. So they span quite a big generation gap. So I feel that I've got some insight into it. But I think the current generation, all my children, the reason I wrote the TV series was as a wake-up call. because the majority of people, as you said earlier, don't know the system is engineered a certain way to keep you on that treadmill.
Okay, very interesting. Very interesting to hear those thoughts. So let's go back to your childhood and teenage years. I always like to
Okay.
ask that question because I know every generation grows up in different environments, but tell me about your childhood and teenage years and maybe compare it with current times. What differences, significant differences you see compared when you grew up and maybe how your kids or current generations grow up in what environments?
Well, that's a good question actually. I spent my I'm a single child. Okay, so and my parents were in their mid 30s when I was born, so they were born in the 20s. My father was served in the war, did the Normandy landing, but he was from a very very large London family, and my mother was also from a large London family. And in those days, the 30s and 40s, there was a lot of things that were never said. And maybe it's a British thing, but things were ignored, and no one got the turd on the table. And there was lots of secrets, and no one dared. I think again a British thing. No one dared to talk about their emotions and how they felt. So that was my parents. So living up as an only child in the 60s. Now the 60s was going through a massive revolution, of course. You had Mary Quant in the miniskirt, you had the pill, there was a sexual revolution, and then MI6 was actually moving against the Rolling Stones. In fact, Mick Jagger was going to get arrested because he was destabilizing the youth. But I was a little bit younger than him, so I didn't really get involved. But there was a massive revolution happening in the 60s as you were moving away from this stiff Victorian attitude into a more of a, as we walk into the 70s, where I was mainly a teenager, and I think it's a fantastic era. Um, that's where I sort of found myself, and it was the generation of disco in 1977 with, and then you had Star Wars, so there was a sci-fi, the art of the possible, and all of a sudden, it unlocked. I went, did a lot of clubbing, and it was an absolute blast, the 70s. And in that time I also wanted to live in California because there was a big surf scene going on. California dreaming, and there was great music scene, and this was a little bit after Flower Power, of course. So, but as an only child, I was let's say maybe I was a little bit suppressed by Victorian parents, their behaviour, and I started rebelling. I was quite a naughty child, and my children will tell you that I've remained naughty all my life. I'm not good at following rules and doing as I'm told. But yeah, I guess my father was always in full employment. Same job for 35 years. That was unheard of now. And I was looked after. I struggled at school because I think boys generally can struggle at school. I was quite sporty, but I didn't do well at school, and I think everyone learns in a different way at a different time. Now I devour knowledge, but back in the days of reading a textbook written in the 1940s that smelt really musty, uh, I think the generation today have a lot of learning aids that I would have loved to have had, but didn't. So my schooling was very sort of authoritarian, still the same today, although they dress it to look different. And I wasn't a big lover of school. I went to an all boys school. It was quite brutal. There was a lot of caning, so there was a lot of hierarchy where you had prefects that could cane boys. So it's quite a brutal upbringing. And yeah, I didn't really have fond memories, I'm afraid. And growing up in the 60s and mainly the 70s, in the UK was union strikes, power cuts, all kinds of things like that. And then, of course, you spit out the other end, and you get older, and you start earning a living, and you move on, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, the younger generations today, they have a lot of great resources for education. The
Yeah,
internet
they
is
do.
filled
I
with
mean,
this. But at the
A
same
lot
time, it's
of
quite dangerous because relying on the source of information that we see in front of us. And sometimes it's not just about what is in front of us, but also using our own abilities and thinking process in order to identify which sources are credible or not. And I think because we are surrounded with such a huge powerhouse of information, we can be overwhelmed but also misleaded in many ways. So yeah, there are some advantages, but also many more
well,
probably disadvantages.
so
I would
Matt,
say.
let's unpick that quickly, right? So let's talk about the internet, right? So Dr. Donald Davis in 1955 created the packet switch network, which became the foundation for a mesh network, which became the internet. Okay, and the problem with the internet is that you have this thing called copy, edit, paste. So any information you send across it is unreliable in a sense that it can be copied, it can be attacked, and it can be diverted. If you then roll forward to generative AI, which I spend a lot of time talking about, you're absolutely right. The problem is the source and reference data, which remains completely unvalidated. And therefore, we have all these tools. It's all built on 7 platforms. There's only 7 platforms there, large language models and things. But all of the tools that are emerging on the top mine reference data, which is inaccurate. And we know with GPT-4, for example, I've played around with it, it lies. If it doesn't know the answer, it fills in the gaps. So what you're doing is compounding the unreliability of the reference and source data. And so you have that, and then you have things coupled with sovereignty, of course. We don't own our data where we should. We should own our creativity, our data. We should own everything. And the only way to do that is to make data itself intelligent. So we know where it's come from, who wrote it, who owns it, last time it was changed, last time it was used. And that's possible. And it's been possible for some while. But unfortunately, the big tech firms don't want you to do that because they make money on the back of the turmoil that's going on where data isn't controlled and owned. And then they resell our data for a profit. So that's my take on it. But you're absolutely right. Unreliability of source and reference data is potentially has huge damaging effects for the current generation at school.
I mean, yes, artificial intelligence is going to solve many issues and problems, but collecting data or selling our data has begun probably with the birth of Facebook, where they started already collecting our information, whatever we traded in, and we didn't think about this, about the small print and terms and conditions, but also in terms of artificial intelligence. There are people who program and teach it and build it. So I had this conversation with someone a while back. How sure are we that those people who create artificial intelligence are not creating another kind of like a schooling system where they think whatever we input into that system is great, but at the same time, or could be disastrous or bad
I'm
for
with you.
humankind.
I'm with you. Look, I mean, when you look at the legal system, right? So if there's a bug in software, you can't sue software as the current legislative system. Also, the person who programmed the software is also outside the scope of if there's been a problem and there's a legal recourse. At the moment, those two things are outside the system. Is there backdoors in software? Of course, there's backdoors in every software. Is there backdoors in AI? Now, without getting into the problems with AI in too much detail, the number one problem is transformers. Okay, they are out of the box. So the same in 1946, when Oppenheimer was playing around splitting uranium and plutonium, no one mentioned the Hippocratic Oath. Should we? They just did. AI is the same. So as soon as it was launched onto the internet, that's it. You can't put it back in the box. You can't uninvent it. The problem with Transformer, which is the T part of GPT, okay, is that already now large language models have learnt human emotion. Nobody told them to do that, apparently. It's not programmed in, okay? So if you talk to Sam Altman, he said, it learned to do it by itself. As soon as it recognizes human emotion, of course, then it learns the ability to lie and trick us and fool us. So that's what you're talking about, is the AI is the existential threat. And we're doing a very, very good job of making it far worse than it should be. The only way to control AI is to use AI to control AI. But we can talk about that another time, maybe.
Yeah. All right. So going back maybe to your youth, who are the most important people in your life when you grew up, and how did they shape you as a person, as you are today?
Yeah, I
This.
think it's. I've been thinking about that actually because my mother, who's actually still alive, she's 97. She's been a massive force in my life. But I would say I got to be careful here because she is still alive, although she's not online. But she's also been a problem in my life, you know. And didn't not diagnose her narcissistic behavior until I was in my 20s. Because when you're living with somebody where things were never good enough, and she was always better, and then you were reminded of the sacrifice that they made for you to to enjoy some benefits. And so that's difficult to live with, actually. And I made a pledge when I had my own children is not to burden them with any of the problems that I had. I wanted them to have a better, freer life than I did, which is for me what it's all about. But I started playing tennis, so I've always been quite sporty, and I got quite good at tennis quite quickly. And in 1974, I played in the World Junior Boys Open, and I discovered a fraternity of tennis players, and that's why I hit two problems really. One was in the UK, tennis was a class system. It's like cricket. It was played by different classes. So tennis was very elitist. So I, as a working class family, I came up against that. But also I sort of surrounded myself with other boys, other nationalities as well, and we all got on as a sort of a group, and we travelled together and what have you. So that was really nice because I didn't have brothers and sisters. So therefore, having a fraternity of fellow tennis players was really good. And in the late 70s, I toured around and played a lot of tournaments, and we became a bit of a family. And so those two things, I guess, my mother being quite a big figure, and also my tennis fraternity, brothers, if you like, in arms. So.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for sharing this. And what about your dream job or career path? Did you have one when you were younger? And how did that change over time? Because you have a wide spectrum of experience now. Did you have something in mind when you were a child and said, okay, this is what I want to be? Or were you quite uncertain because of the difficulties that during your times when you were growing up, the challenges maybe at school you faced, or not being, top class student?
I think in the 60s and 70s, we can all moan, can't we, that we didn't have opportunities, and economically, we were still struggling with the problems after the war, really, where people rebuilding, and Europe was rebuilding. But one of the things that I never really wanted to be like a policeman or an astronaut or a farmer or any of those things. I just didn't know. And it wasn't until I was in my mid-teens when I thought I wanted to be a tennis player. I wanted to play pro tennis, and then the harsh reality hit me when I was sort of around 18, 19. Was you needed capital, you needed a system, you needed people to help you, and I didn't have that. And then the next question was, was I actually good enough? So you have this dream, and then you have this reality check where you have to face up to say, am I good enough? Or is it the fact I've got a lack of support that I'm not getting the right results? And I guess really that I made that decision for myself quite early. And then in fortunately, when I was at college, I did a computer course, and then and it was quite useful because it was still mainframes then, but it was in 1979. While I was playing tennis, I did a computing course, and then by 1980, 79, when I decided maybe I shouldn't play tennis, I started my first computer company. as the PC revolution came along, and it was purely fluke. There was no real anything other than that. I did this course because it paid a grant, and because they in that they wanted people to go on the course. So I thought, okay, well, I was struggling to make money playing tennis, so I took the grant. And in actual fact, serendipity sort of played its role. It was at the point where the desktop revolution was about to happen, and so I was all over it. And then, the '80s, it was a case of strap yourself in, because it was a wild decade of startups. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. But there was no real science to it, I'm afraid.
Okay. Okay, got it. So, what piece of advice would you give to someone starting out in career or profession? I know we tapped at the very beginning about different thoughts surrounding this, but specifically
Yeah.
for younger people, how should they tackle their future, especially in those times?
Well, I think there's obviously peer and parent pressure. Okay, so you're going to get that, right? When I was younger, my peer group and in the world I lived in, people didn't go to university. Okay, so but all my children have. Okay, so some of it has to do with capital and cost, um, but also you got peer pressure, of course, and so parent and peer pressure early on. I think the piece of advice that I always give my children is I expose them to lots of different things. I never had the opportunity to do music. All my kids have done music. All my kids do sport. All my kids have done, and if they want to start a business, we help them. And in a sense, now all of my children, well, apart from my daughter who is works in the NHS here, but all my children are entrepreneurs. And so my advice to young people is try lots of different things, because you don't know what you're good and what you're bad at until you have a go. I mean, I've seen situations where, for example, my daughter, who is badly dyslexic, she was really bad behind at school, but she worked her way through. She kept at it. She got a degree, then he got a master's, and now she's one of the top dietitians in London, helping people with gut disorders. Now, as a dyslexic person, she was very good at music because she could hear, but her reading and writing skills weren't so good. So quite often, you as youngsters, you try things and they don't work out. Just keep trying different things. I mean, a lot of it comes down to having a bit of cash and extra time, yes, but sometimes it doesn't. Are you good at music? Are you good at sport? Can you retain information? Do you love, what's your hand-eye coordination like? Even some of your physical motor skills come into play. I remember in the, when one of the things I did want to do when I was younger was fly, to be a fighter pilot. And but I discovered quite early on that I was slightly colorblind, which is no good if you're in a cockpit environment, for recognizing things going on. So my advice would be, try lots of different things. Get on a horse, go and play a game of tennis, try golf, try and play the drums, try and play the guitar, or go on stage, do some acting, whatever it is. But I think the system, which we touched on earlier, tends to squeeze creativity and diversity out of you. The system is, and your parents, because you hear a lot of parents is get a proper job, and that means that the creative arts often don't get their fair share of being heard. Because in my parents' generation, a proper job would mean get a profession, maybe become a solicitor or an accountant, but also learn to lay bricks, learn to be a carpenter. There was that. But in the current generation, you do have the means now for the young generation to try and test different things, don't you? With tools and access to technology, you can try things quickly to see if it's your thing, to see if you resonate, to see if you can gel with it. So my number one advice is don't follow a single path if you can, even if it's your passion. Always have a plan B and a plan C, and try lots of different things, because you never know. what the world has in store for you.
You said we have all the means to try different things out, but what do you think are the challenges that the younger generations facing today?
Well, I think you've just nailed it in the question. They're probably overloaded. In a sense, my issue with this current generation is they have their head down in the blue screen. Okay, and I talk about this on my YouTube channel a lot, and a lot of people say life will be better in augmented reality or the metaverse or what have you, and we're being pulled into social media, which is massively manipulating us. It's feeding us things that get under our skin and make us create a reaction. So there's a massive amount of manipulation going on, and I think the current generation is information overload. I mean, they're bombarded with things, and you know what it's like on social media. There's hundreds of get rich quick scams and schemes, and become a YouTuber and get 1,000 followers and they pay you and all of these things. And I think it's confusing, and I don't think it's helpful, because I think 90% of what's being thrown at the younger generation isn't real, doesn't work, is a little bit scammy, and but it's noise and it gets inside their heads. And I just think this living in the blue screen, living online world where you should be walking in the hills, swimming in the sea, sniffing the air, going throwing sticks for a dog, building relationships with physical people, not digital things. And I don't think the current generation do enough of that. And therefore, when you play that forward, don't you, into building a business or trying to create your own company, then you still need at the heart of it, we're people, we're humans, and we're animals, and we like to be together. We're pack animals in a sense. We like to hang around in groups, and I think being isolated. I mean, COVID didn't help us, did it? It made us all sort of more digital nomads, and maybe that's by design. We have to wait and see when the next pandemic arrives, of course. But I think that is part of the manipulation. Is, if you think about what happens in France, for example, the French are very good, as a lot of countries are, when their people get together, that revolutions tend to happen. So what you can look at it through a different lens, is that this whole authoritarian use of technology is keeping us from getting together, and therefore recognizing what's going on, and then actually taking to the streets, taking to arms, and pushing back. So yeah, I know there's a lot in that answer, but I do think that the current generation, and let's talk about the millennials and the Gen Zs, really, they need to lift their head up. They need to see what's going on, and 90%, 95% of the media and the news and information cannot be trusted, and it is a manipulation. It's a full-time manipulation of all of us. And these large language models and AI are so clever that they can really work out what makes us tick and what makes us angry, what makes us upset. And that manipulation is significant. And the current generation are just absorbed into that world, and they need to lift their heads up and get out of that world from time to time, and experience different things. So I think it's the current generation, they need to turn the screen off, turn tech off for a bit, go out into the real world and have experiences, physical experiences, do different things, and remind themselves that living is about literally that, living. It's not about being consumed into a digital world.
Thank you for sharing this. Makes a lot of sense, and I would agree with many of those things. Even though I'm young, I do see very much a big portion of what you said as truthful, and I think there needs to be more kind activities for individuals where they interact more physically with each other, because we are indeed absorbed into that digital space and disconnected from the reality in a way and the real values of life.
Yeah, and believe me, when you're young and you think you have time, that time goes very rapidly. And then as soon as you start, once you've had your children and you go on that journey and you hit your 50s and then 60s and then 70s, it's all about runway at that point. You suddenly realize that there is less time to do things. So time is the one valuable commodity that, unfortunately, when you're young, you don't appreciate it so much. As you get older, time is the one commodity that you value beyond everything else. And of course, health, of course, but health is linked to time. If you stay healthy, you theoretically will have more time.
Yeah. Let's talk about habits. What positive habit had an impact on you, and how did you develop it throughout your life?
It's interesting. Again, I've thought about this, and I think if I answer it a slightly different way. Okay, so my four children have seen my ups and downs. Okay, and the positive behavior that I have is that it's about bouncing back. In arguably getting the most out of life and being successful is your ability to get up and bounce back, because life is a series of being knocked about and knocked over and pushed back. And I think about, it's that ability maybe to re-energize, reinvent yourself, to pivot, to bounce back. And I guess really because maybe my childhood was it was stable, but it was a bit difficult. Maybe I learned the ability to sort of stand on my own 2 feet, take it on the chin and say I messed up, and it was my fault. I mean, quite often human nature is to try and blame the system or blame somebody else. In actual fact, to take it on the chin and say, well, I screwed up, that's on me. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something about it, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to learn. Learning from mistakes. Everyone talks about it. It's really important. I think it's very hard because we're emotional people and we have short memories. And sometimes, so in terms of habits, um, I have to force myself from jumping in with both feet. I get drawn into that excitement, as we said earlier, of starting something new or this new idea or this new technology, and I get pulled in. I also get pulled in quite quickly into new relationships, which my wife will tell me off about, because sometimes she sees something that I don't, because I'm quite trusting. But yeah, I think the habits are you is not to rush in so much as I used to, and there's always tomorrow. Sleep on decisions, and that's not the habits of a younger person. They tend to move much quicker, but the habits of an older person should be to, having said we don't have much time, but to sleep on things. So yeah, it's a tricky one. Habits, the ability to bounce back and not give up, and actually to expect that you might be pushed on your ass again at some point, um, and have something from left field come at you which you hadn't seen, hadn't considered, and it can be bad. So I try not to think about doom and gloom too much. I'm a very positive person if I can. And again, my wife will remind me that I'm often too positive, and I don't consider the downside so much. So yeah, it's a tricky one. Habits, yeah, bouncing back is a good habit to have.
I can see we've got some similarities here. The longer I talk to you, the longer I see kind of many things I do in a very similar way. Let's talk maybe about some books. I always like to ask that question. Do you have any books? Have you read any books that you could recommend to the younger generations to pick up on and think they would be worthwhile reading? Whether
Yeah,
this would
I
be
mean,
personal ones you've written, or whether these could be books you've read written by someone else and you would say, give it a go, it's worth it.
yeah. Well, I do read a lot actually, and my reading list is significant, and I'm always buying books, much to my wife's annoyance. It depends on the topic, really. my attitude is you need to be well read, so you need to diversify your reading massively. And I also use a reading app called Blinkist, which is quite good. It's some young German guys. They summarize books for you. So if you don't have time to read a 300-page book, you can listen to it in the car, which is quite useful. I read anything with Roger Penrose, for example, which is he's a physicist. And you talk about Ghost in the Machine and sentient and AI and that. So there's that whole physics and metaphysics, that whole piece as you move into the quantum computing area and quantum mechanics. For me, that's fundamental to everything: quantum mechanics and metaphysics. So anything with Roger. But then Dr. David Sinclair wrote a fantastic book called Lifespan. And he's the head of genetics at Harvard Med, and he talks about how to slow down the aging process, and there are things we can do, and synthetic biology, and you think about CRISPR, which Jennifer Doudna created CRISPR. There is a great book called I think it's called Solving the Code, or Cracking the Code of Life, which is fascinating, and you learn about the genome and DNA and genes and so on, which I write about in my TV miniseries actually, and so it's a very diverse. I love alien conspiracies, believe it or not. I read anything to do with abductions, which is interesting. I've read hundreds of books about abductions, and going back way before the internet and technology is very good, and they break down into 8 or 10 different types, and they're all the same. I like a lot of historical stuff as well, so I'm one of the people that believe that humanity's been knocking around for a lot longer than history tells us, and I also believe that the technologies that we have today are really disappointing, and we've had better technologies which have been suppressed. So anything to do with cutting edge, so synthetic biology, quantum mechanics, I love things like that. I don't really read novels and at all. It's mainly around trying to learn something or broaden my understanding of something. I do read quite a lot of history as well, because historical context, it does have a habit of repeating itself. So books, for example, like Why Nations Fail is a really interesting book, which centers on some of the topics we've touched on, authoritarian and totalitarianism things. So yeah, it's unfortunately it's a very 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 diverse set of books, and now and again on LinkedIn, and I'm a big LinkedIn hound, I'll put a stack of books that I'm reading and ask people to comment on them. And yeah, I read a lot. So watch this space.
Oh, thank you for sharing the list. Very interesting. There are some of them I haven't read and definitely would be interested to look into. Everyone has a different answer to it. There's not one that can be applied to everyone. But in your opinion, what do you think is the key to a successful and fulfilling life?
Gosh, goodness me. I think I've been married for 35 years, right? And I've known my wife probably for 40 years. And before we met, you could say that we were both quite wild children, quite wild teenagers, and in our early 20s, we went for it a bit, okay, in lots of different ways. And then we met, and then very quickly we started a family. So for me, everything changes when you have children, when you have dependents. And we had them when I was 25. I had 3 boys under 5 before, when I was still trying to sort of, start new businesses and do. So we had a big family quite quickly. But everything changes, and for me, that is what I do everything for now, which is for family. And now I have grandchildren, and I guess my mantra is to make sure my children have a better life and opportunity that I did. Now, I'm not saying my life and opportunity was crap, and really bad, but it had certain limitations to do with the time I was born and the type of family I lived in and the household income and things like that. So I wanted my children to have better opportunities than me, and that's my motivation really. And I have this sort of theological debate quite often: is what's our purpose? And if you peel back all the layers, we're animals at the end of the day, and we only have 2% different genome structure to a chimpanzee, right? So we're fortunate in being able to talk, and we're fortunate that we call ourselves at the top of the food chain as the most intelligent species, which isn't correct, by the way. But yeah, I think what's our purpose? And if you look at evolution, if you believe evolution, and I'm not saying I don't, but there are big gaps in evolution. It's the propagation of the species. It's if you think about what we're here is to continue, humanity continues to be here. That's what every other species is about. And it's quite a revelation, isn't it, when you find out that DNA didn't originate on Earth. And you start thinking, wait a minute, and then the periodic table and then Darwin's evolution, there's massive gaps. And then you look at the DNA helix, which is actually a vibrating crystal. There's big gaps in that, which sort of suggest it could have been engineered or changed at some point. So, but what are we here for? I think we're here for is to have family, to propagate our species, and ensure the future of civilization in a sense. So hopefully that's an answer you haven't heard before.
No, it is one of its kind, definitely. Okay. What do you think the society could do to support the younger people these days? Do you think there are some flaws and something could be improved?
Yeah, I guess the leading edge question is society, right? And one of the things that I wrestle with all the time is the clash of systems, if you like, totalitarianism, authoritarianism, benevolent dictatorships, and so on. And one of the challenges I have is the rhetoric from the West. I do a lot of stuff in the Middle East. One of my sons lives there, and we run some big events out in the Middle East. So I rub shoulders with some very, very rich and powerful people in family offices, and which is connected to one of my day jobs, if you like. And I just think the rhetoric coming from the West is just wrong now. I think the political class and the direction of travel is also wrong. And let's not forget, at the middle of everything is we still have an oil-based economy that run the world, and everything stems from that, which is we know is part of the issue. But in the 30s, there was no demand for oil. The demand for oil is being created artificially, in the same way demand for pharmaceuticals is being created artificially. And what they do is the people that control those industries, they outlaw competition. So holistic medicine's been outlawed, or they've been, sort of ridiculed. Alternative power sources have been, held back and got rid of for years and decades. And this sustainability environmental lobby is not real either. It's a massive manipulation. So the thing for the current generation, which I say to my kids a lot, is you've got to understand the history and why we are in the position we're in. Okay, even down to the things like, why was JFK assassinated? Well, he was anti-war. Well, that tells you everything you need to know, right? So if you think about what's good for business, wars are good for business. They're good for countries, and I think the West's political system, all they do is criticize communism. They criticize Russia. They criticize anybody who has a different system. But then, the Western systems are becoming more authoritarian with the use of technology. Freedoms are being eroded. Sovereignty is being eroded. And it's all being done by stealth. So, for this current generation to sort of we need this current generation. The world is being run by 75, 80-year-old men in suits, and that's not a good thing, right? And I sort of lean to what my wife says is that if women run the world, it would be a safer place. I tend to agree, to be honest. But if you think about structurally what's going on, we're heading in a bad direction. Okay, and yes, the existential threat of AI, but we may not even get to that point. There's a lot of posturing going on around resources and control and what have you, and that's not healthy either. And then the media are sort of brainwashing the young generation to say, well, they're the enemy over there and they're the bad guys over there, without actually considering actually the West might be the problem, as we try and sort of put our version of democracy onto other people, which I'm not convinced is right. The Middle East, for me, is run by families. It's a benevolent dictatorship in a sense, but for me, it works. They have a 20-year plan. If you read the Xi Jinping's plan, which he has every 4 years for China, it's a plan. It's a long-term plan. The West doesn't have that anymore. We have political systems that eat each other every 2 to 4 years, and we don't move forward. We're losing influence. We're losing market share because of that. Asia is exploding. Indonesia, Malaysia is exploding with commerce, new ideas. It's going mad. It's going crazy. You have the BRICS nations now, which have decided they've had enough of the US dollar economy as a reserve currency. Most reserve currencies don't survive 100 years. So the dollar's on its way out. We know that. But, what I would say to the young generation is think about what else is going on in some of these other countries and regions, because there's a lot of good stuff going on, and don't read and take too much on board what Fox or CNN or the BBC is telling you. Find out for yourself. And sure, there's bad people. Sure, there's some really terrible things going on in some of these parts of the world. But the West is equally as bad. We have poverty on our back door. The governments are doing really bad things. We can argue about the vaccine situation. Was that industrialized genocide? ? So we have an infected food chain, which is not good. Lots of processed stuff, which we know is bad for you, and. So for the youngsters to look at the world through a Western lens, I think is unhelpful. I think they need to go to these places, talk to the people, stay there for a bit, and find out what's going on. And you'll find that it's nothing like the way in which the West often portray it. And I think the Western media and the political class is a problem. And if I was a youngster, and if you think about it, it's validated Republicans and Democrats, Conservatives and Labour in the UK. If you think about how the population votes, each one of those parties has about between 24 and 27% of the vote, which means if the Republicans and Democrats is about 50%, it means 50%, the other 50% don't associate with either of those parties, which means that the vast majority, especially this young generation, Gen Zs and millennials, don't associate with or can't relate to the current political agendas. They just can't relate to it. So therefore, what comes next for them? We need them for our future. We need them empowered and galvanized, their ideas, their creativity, to run the world and sort the world out. But that's what I would say is they need to. I know it's a long answer, but it's, you've got to see clearly. And I don't think the young people do that. I think they're so easily, again, blue screen, and they're being manipulated, and they don't know they're being manipulated. So, the right brain activity of self, free will, creativity, it's our diet and Wi-Fi and things like that doesn't help us from a chemistry point of view, from a physics point of view. We know the powers that be don't want the people to have free thinking. They want us to do as we're told,
Yeah, very powerful answer. And I think I do agree in a way that the system has been altered in a way to keep us in place and don't think in our own way and do things how we would want them to happen. So we're being suppressed in a way. And I think it will end very soon because there has to be a limit to everything that is going on at the moment. There will be a break point, but let's hope it will be for a better and positive future in a way. Thank
Well,
you
we
very
need,
much.
something. We need something, Matt, don't we?
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. I wanted to thank you very much for sharing so many great stories on this podcast. I do have a final question. Is there
Okay.
a word of wisdom you would want to pass on to the younger generation, besides from what you've shared already during our conversation? Anything that you think could be beneficial or not?
Well, I'm sure the classical answer is, life is a journey, etc., etc. I think if I had my time again, and which is sort of a similar thing, what would I sort of advice I'd give to myself if I had my time again? And I think really the number one thing that springs to mind is just go for it. Really go for it. Everyone talks about follow your passion. Look, can you make money out of your passion? You don't know. But what is your passion? What you think is your passion may not be your passion, because as I said earlier, you need to try lots of different things. And you don't know. You don't know how you're programmed and wired. You don't know how genetics and your brain is wired enough to say, this is definitely my path and this is definitely my passion. I would say you don't know. And you may never know, but actually, if you try lots of different things, the chances are you'll make some discoveries. So diversity, travel, go to different parts of the world, experience lots of different things. Push your body, push your brain to do different things, and keep trying to find new experiences. And at the end of the day, if we think about the esoteric things about what makes us human, yeah, consciousness. What is consciousness? Well, maybe it's related to experiences. How we experience things is fundamental. Jump in a freezing cold water, jump in the sea, swim with the dolphin. You know, do the acrobat. Loop the loop on an aircraft. I mean, whatever it is, jump off a helicopter and go skiing in the top of the mountains. I would say, I within economic opportunity, of course, but try lots of different things and go for it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nick. I wanted to thank you very much for your time, for sharing all these stories. It's been a great journey. I think there's some very valuable and interesting content for the people who will watch it. And I do hope this is not going to be our last conversation and we can keep and stay in touch in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much, mate.
Thank you.